So, yeah. Okay. Okie dokie. So, everybody ready? Anybody have any questions for me before we go live? No? Okay.
No.
Okay, so we are now going to go to broadcast and hopefully start getting our participants in.
When are you expecting?
Okay, so good.
Can you hear us all?
I can hear. I've heard Ruben and Steve and Larry. I haven't heard George, but I imagine you're hearable.
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me?
One sec.
Do I come through on the audio or not?
I hear you fine, George.
Okay, good. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, good. Yep. And Bob, I'm sure I can hear you, but if you want to try.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just unmuted, so
Okay, all
is that
good.
coming in? Okay.
So welcome, audience. Folks are just beginning to head on in, so I'm going to give people a few more minutes here, and then we will begin our official introductions and so on.
Penny, we're not hearing you.
Yeah. How many forums have you guys done at this point? Is this there was one yesterday, wasn't there?
76.
Um,
There was one yesterday.
Yeah, there was a police interview yesterday. I had a meet and greet yesterday. Then there was a main forum that the village Laguna did.
Uh-huh.
What else?
Kind of heading into a bunch of them here.
Yeah, this is the beginning. This is like the beginning of the
Yeah, Saturday morning we have one.
craziness.
Larry, have you done this before?
In terms of a campaign thing?
Yeah.
No.
Oh.
No,
Okay.
this is my first foray into the.
So I'm going to mute myself for just a moment here. We do have about 14 people in the audience at this point. So I'm going to give us a couple minutes more because we're actually, so not yet at our official opening. So I'm just going to mute for a moment. And I'm just kind of letting you guys know that you are audible. So any chat is heard by our audience.
Yeah, next week's going to be busy. The next couple of weeks are going to be kind of busy.
I was kind of worried that I might forget one, even though it's
Yeah, I've been trying to. I think I've got a list that's accurate. I'll share it with you if you want to just give me a call tomorrow. In fact, maybe I'll just circulate it around and let you guys know what I've got. You can check it against if I missed anything.
Cool.
Check it against that.
Okay, well, it is 6 o'clock. I want to get us started. So, well, good evening, both the community members and candidates, and thank you very much for coming. So as many of you probably know, my name is Penelope Milne, and I'm the president of CANDO, the Canyon Alliance of Neighborhoods Defense Organization. So we advocate both for our neighborhoods and for the wild environment. My virtual background this evening is a William Wendt painting of Laguna Canyon from 100 years ago. It was lovely and beloved then, and it is now. I'm going to be the moderator this evening. Tara Thompson is also going to be co-host, and she'll be reviewing and sorting questions that the audience submits. So, audience members, you perhaps will have noticed that at the bottom of your screen, you have a little Q&A box. You can drop questions into that if you would like. And later in the evening, at about 7:30, we're going to do some audience questions after we have done the, pre-selected questions. So. Let's see, I want to quickly go over a few housekeeping things. So as you will note, audience members, you don't right now have video or audio available to you, like you can't speak and we can't see you, which is very sad, which is why we're going to do audience questions later. During the forum, you will have the opportunity to submit questions. We are recording the forum, and we are doing Facebook Live. So after the forum, I will share the link. So if one of your neighbors misses it, you can share that link with them. So just going to quickly go over what the format is for this evening, which the candidates already know, but you may be glad to have a little reminder. First, you're going to have 2 minutes each to introduce yourself. After that, we're going to respond to the pre-submitted questions. Again, that's going to be 2 minutes for intros and 2 minutes per question. If necessary, the moderator may ask a follow-up question, and the candidates will have 30 seconds to respond. We're going to rotate the speaking order of the candidates. You'll start in alphabetical order and then skip once, down the alphabet by one each time. After the pre-submitted questions, we'll take audience questions. We probably won't be able to get to all of those. My hope is that the council members will agree to, the council candidates rather, will agree to do some by email later if we have some great juicy questions. When we do audience questions, I am going to unmute the audience member so they can effectively step to the mic and ask their question of the candidates themselves. So then we're going to finish up with the candidates' final statements and our conclusion. So without further ado, having done lots of ado, let's get to the candidate intros. So we're going to be going alphabetically by last name. So that means Steve Dictorow will begin, followed by Ruben Flores, Larry Noakes, George Weiss, and Bob Whalen. I will be acting as timekeeper, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left and when you have 10 seconds left. So let me just, so Steve, if you would like to begin.
Hey, thank you, Penny. I want to thank you and CANDO for this opportunity for me and for my fellow candidates to have this opportunity to speak to the Canyon people as well as the rest of town. I am running for re-election. I'm running for re-election because I believe that I make a difference and that the course that the town has taken over the last years have been substantially due to my efforts, and that we are moving in a good direction. But despite that, we have unprecedented threats to our quality of life, to the look and feel of our town, and to our financial situation. These threats are caused by the increasing population in Orange County. They come to Laguna Beach. Social media opening up the areas of town that nobody knew about, usurpation of our authority by Coastal Commission and the state, the effect of COVID on our town, and the attempts at overdevelopment. At its crisis time like this, we need to have experienced people. We need to have people who have skill, people who have a proven record, and people who show leadership. And that's why I'm running, because I feel that I've done that and I will continue to do that. And that that is the direction that local government should take at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Ruben, you are next. And again, you have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, I don't have the background that Steve does already on the council. So I'm Ruben Flores, and I've been a resident of Laguna Beach for a little over 20 years and a business owner here in town for about 30. I own 2 businesses. One of them is called Visionscape, which is the landscape company. And then I own Laguna Nursery, which many of you are familiar with. That was in Midtown and now it's in Northtown. Born and raised in California, some of the areas that I think I would like to emphasize that need some work in our town is one, development. We know development is coming, and we have the opportunity to shape it. If you drove down Dana Point, it's looking very nice if you like that. And for people in Dana Point, they have a lot of new buildings. I'd prefer that we didn't have that. I want Laguna to keep looking like Laguna as long as we can do it. If you were on the city council meeting last night, there was another breach of civility, and I'd like to bring back civility to our city council meetings as well as just around town. So we need to make sure that that's something that we put into effect, not just say that we're going to put into effect. We have a issue with vitality in our town. There's a lot of storefronts that are closed. I'd like to bring the vitality back into our town. I'd like it to be a place that we come to do some beautiful shopping, and our restaurants. Thank you for the 30. And
Yeah, sorry, it's reversed.
oh, that's okay. Beauty. I think we need to bring the beauty back into our town. And there used to be a mystique about our town. I want it to be beautiful, and I want it to be mysterious. I want it to be a place people come and they get excited to visit rather than they just park and go to the beach. So thank you, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Okay. So, and then next is Larry.
Yes, and thank you, Penny, and thanks to CANDO for the opportunity to be here with my fellow candidates and address you tonight. I have lived in this city since 1984, and I had the unique experience last Saturday to get a guided tour of the canyon by residents who are there. So I want to thank Bob Hemsley and Helen Shirley and Marcia and Carl Class and Ralph Hahn and Susan and John Hamill and Kathy Jones and John Alberton and Tara Thompson and Hallie Jones and Bob Borthwick for spending some of their Saturday with us and really teaching us about each one of the neighborhoods. They're fabulous. My experience in the canyon has been on working on sort of several issues there, from flood abatements to easement issues to walls. But it was amazing to get kind of a holistic view of each of the, the beautiful neighborhoods. The Thurston HOA, the Sarah Thurston Park, the Canyon Acres area, the artist working areas, Kathy Jones Studio, Castle Rock area and Sun Valley area. Really, really enjoyed it. I have been involved, as I said, in various issues in the canyon, including opposing the street widening up near Annalise. So I'm a little bit familiar with some of the things that have plagued and bothered the canyon people for a long time, and that they've been trying to oppose in order to maintain the neighborhood character of the area. I am a trial lawyer by trade. I have been practicing in Laguna Beach since 1995. I've been practicing law since 1982. I've been a resident here since, as I said, at 1984. I have shown leadership in the city by helping to implement new ordinances that I chaired, ran the outreach for. Those included the View Preservation and Privacy Preservation Ordinance and the Historic Preservation Ordinance. I think I have the experience and the know-how to come in and help get things done that we need to tackle. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, George, you are up.
Thank you, Penny. Enjoyed the tour on Saturday. I'm a 15-year resident of Laguna Beach. I've served on the Laguna Beach Beautification Council as president, and also on the Housing Human Services Committee as a board member and chairperson, and also was a member of the Transition Laguna early on, helped build gardens. I also was on the president of Laguna Beach Beautification Council. So I believe in public service, and I think that's an important element of anybody coming into politics. They have to care about the community, and I do. And that's the reason I'm running. I was a reluctant candidate. The last year, I've been working on a ballot initiative for Laguna Beach with two other gentlemen. I left that pack a month ago. We have a ballot initiative that's been approved by the city attorney that will help protect the canyon from development. I've been talking to folks out in Canyon Acres and Thurston, and I plan to go to other areas. And there is pretty widespread agreement that they want to be protected from large developments like 40 units of housing. If our ballot initiative had been approved, the Lolongi project would have been gone to a vote. And that's what I'm for. I'm for restoring the balance between residents, visitors, and business interests. That balance has been lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Okay, and Bob.
Thank you, Penny, and thanks to CANDO and the opportunity to be here tonight. It's always good to talk to our friends in the Canyon. You know, as I was reflecting back on the 8 years that I've been on council, beginning in 2012, really a lot of my emphasis has been on projects in the Canyon. You know, I initiated the Laguna Canyon Road Task Force that met for nearly 2 years. I think we came out with some really good recommendations there that I'm still hoping we work on longer term. You know, it requires some undergrounding, but we were looking at pedestrian paths and bicycle paths, getting you a safer ingress and egress from your neighborhoods and connecting you to town. Worked extensively on the wildfire mitigation and fire safety report. Very, very proud of the fact that we now have an additional 55 acres of fuel modification going on in the canyon with thanks to some state grants that we were able to get in place. And there's other elements of that report that will benefit the canyon as well in terms of evacuation safety and firefighting capabilities with, you know, some helicopter refilling stations. So those are important things for neighborhood safety out there. Also worked and was at several meetings with Caltrans and other city officials and Penny, amongst others, on the El Toro Road proposal that Caltrans had, that we were successful in getting the back off the widening of the inland merge lane there. And I think it's going to be a great improvement to get Annalise over ingressing and egressing off of El Toro Road. You know, we also, during my tenure on the council, we worked on the, as a council, and Steve was part of it, certainly, we worked on the landfill, you know, restoration up there. And we got the Laguna Canyon Foundation building that I was able to get the tail end of the tour the other day out there. And that's a beautiful addition to the canyon. So I look forward to our discussion tonight, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Great, thank you. Okay, so you will, candidates, you will see that that you can see questions in the Q&A, right? As panelists, you can see that. What we're planning to do with them is Tara, our fabulous and efficient co-host, will generally handle or address those. And then we're going to try and sort and see if we can get some questions from our audience that we will ask at the audience Q&A part, which will be after I ask you 6 or 7 pre-submitted questions. So, yeah, you'll have a glance at them, but we depending on how many are submitted, you may not wind up answering all of them because we won't have time. Additionally, the audience might be putting in questions that are not specifically to the candidates. They might just be comments on other things. So, and attendees, again, if you have, you know, questions, if something, you know, if you're listening to something and you think, hey, wait, go ahead and drop something in the Q&A. Okay, so we are going to move on to the question portion. And as I said to you, we are going to kind of go through each time. We'll start with whoever's next on our list alphabetically. So for this first question, Ruben, you'll go first and you'll be followed by Larry, George, Bob, excuse me, and then Steve. And remember that you have 2 minutes each. And again, I will give you the warning. And I think, you know, despite the fact that I love it, I think I might just turn off my background, because they always do that, right? They always do that, like wobbling back and forth. So that makes it a lot harder to see the numbers. So I think we're just going to go with that. Okay, so here's our first question. And again, Ruben, you're going to be first, and then Larry, you'll be after that. So the Laguna Canyon annexation area specific plan requires that development in the annexation area be small scale and rural. Describe what that looks like and what limits that might impose on development. You have 2 minutes.
Wow. It conjures up at least 30 different images for me. And really what I like to do with that is exactly what I would do for a client, is that we first define what the look is, and then we show some pictures to each other of what we think that look is. I think the best way to do that, and to do that with the people in the canyon, is to throw to them 5-10 pictures and say, what is the look that you would like for your canyon? And then also then that gets extrapolated to everybody in the town. For me, it would be a small scale building, maybe 1.5 stories. And it would be never to get to any large extent of the property that it sits on. We want to maintain setbacks larger in the canyon than there would be anywhere else. We would want to have less of a contemporary feel and more of a rural rustic feel. However, I have to say I'm not against putting a little bit of maybe mid-century modern in there. I don't feel, let's say it this way, Laguna was built with bohemian ideas, and you would never really squash that. So there might have been a bohemian existence in between some rurals. So the expression, the true expression of the canyon, I would want it to be felt, and I think that that would live through in a more rustic canyon feel. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruben. So, yeah, okay. And you know you're next. Okay, very good. Larry is next, and you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Penny. I think in touring the canyon the other day, you couldn't help but be struck by sort of the rural feel of it. And particularly when you got up away from the canyon road, and you had an opportunity to either get way back into the neighborhoods or up a little bit on the hillside and sort of observe across the canyon. And what struck me significantly was the rural sense of that, and then how is it that is maintained. A lot of times, you'll drive through the canyon and you see sort of those buildings that are in the M1A zone, and you see sort of a manufacturing thing. And that might be all people, what a lot of people notice. But what we were able to see in getting deeper and deeper into the canyon is that it's really sort of defined by low intensity. And I'm not sure that really is defined by having a lot and then just building on a fragment of that lot, because some of the lots are small. But I think having things of an appropriate scale, perhaps using primarily a cottage vibe that's faithful to an agricultural rural look is nice out there. It fits in. Now, we saw a lot of houses also sort of back in the back of the Canyon Acres area and the Sarah Thurston Park area that are really amazing houses, and they're not necessarily tiny. I mean, there are some substantial structures out there that are beautiful, but they fit well. And so I think if you keep thematically within that genre, you're in good shape. Another thing is that there is a rustic feel to the canyon, and a lot of that is accomplished by the landscaping and the spacing of the houses, the trees, and is my time up?
Your time is up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I did do that. So yeah, your time is
I
up.
apologize.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and let me just reset that. And let's see, George, you are next, and then after you will be Bob and then Steve. So
thanks, Penny. Okay, well, I think the expectation when residents of the canyon agreed to the annexation was that the specific plan would be kept as a trust in spirit and in the letter. And that hasn't happened. The Longy project took 7 years to be approved, and now it's being built. 28 units, artist work live. It's certainly not rustic. It's certainly not rural. So I would have voted against that on the city council. And I would have for future projects like that. The 40 units that are proposed for Canyon Acres, I would be absolutely opposed to those because they don't fit in. Now, we can't stop some development from occurring, but that has to be reasonable. And it has to be with the approval of the residents and the city. If they're over the ballot initiative that I sponsored and has now been approved by the city attorney, says anything over 9 units in the canyon has to be voted on by residents. They'll have a voice. So I don't see many places for that. Penny, there's probably some in Sun Valley. But I want to keep the character of the canyon the way it is. It's beautiful, it's eclectic. It may be a little funky in spots, but that's what we have, and we should maintain it as best we can. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, George. And now, Bob.
Thank you. Yeah, the small scale and rural are the key words in the document, and I think it's on the work plan, and it's been too long on the work plan to get back to that document and put more definition to those terms. I think that's one of the things we need to do. We need to, and as Ruben was saying, we need to explore it. We need to have input. We need to have a community discussion about what does that mean. I think part of the problem was they were just there as those terms and, interpreted broadly, to say the least, with respect to the one project, the Longy project, which the other piece of it that, I think, and I've talked about this before, I think a little bit of it depends on where you are in the canyon. To me, it's a continuum. And as you start at El Toro Road, and you've got, that's got to be the most rural, the smallest, probably limited to single family residential. And then as you come in a little further, I think you can have a slightly increased level of development. But even there, as you come in and some of the lots get larger, and I've talked with some canyon residents about this. You can do some, if you count the canyon as coming all the way in beyond Canyon Acres, there's some deeper lots that you could develop on without impacting the canyon view. So it kind of depends where you're on that continuum, and I think we need to have that whole discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, Steve, you.
Thank you, Penny. I want to piggyback a little bit onto what Bob said, because I really agree with the concept of the transition from El Toro Road all the way down to the Sawdust Festival. I mean, it really is going to still be small scale and rural the whole way, but it is a transition from totally natural to some sort of man-developed stuff along the way, really not getting any more developed than what is by the look and feel of the Sawdust area. The key to any of this is what doctrines are we going to apply to ensure that these occur? And these are doctrines that to some extent already exist. We need to be pushing the idea of neighborhood compatibility. That is how we can retain the look and feel of our town. And we have to respect the environment. And we've done pretty good job generally on air and water quality. We've not done as good a job on retaining our natural vegetation or preserving the wildlife in that area. I think we should also be expanding the specific plan to cover the entire area of the canyon, but with special emphasis on retaining the look and feel of the mini neighborhoods such as Canyon Acres and Castle Rock and Thurston. And as far as what it should look like, take a look at the MIG Laguna Canyon study. There's a photo in there that really gives a sense of what the look and feel should be.
Thank you. Okay, so we are on to question 2. Doing so great. So we're And on this one, Larry, you are going to go first, and then George, Bob, Steve, and I'll remind you as you go, but you'll be the first. So you have, but Larry will be first, and we have 2 minutes. So question is, the city is studying taking over ownership of Laguna Canyon Road from Caltrans. What might be some advantages and disadvantages? And sort of more broadly, if you'd like to include that, how much responsibility should a city take on? So Larry?
So the advantage is obviously our local control of the traffic flow and the width of the street, and control as to the easements, control as to the sidewalks, and control as to how the lanes are created and maintained. The issue that we always hear about has to do with expense, and one of the, I think, the reasons that we haven't taken over some of these streets from Caltrans is because we're worried about expense and we're worried about liability. But in the case of the Canyon Road, I think there may be some benefits from taking that, including perhaps the ability, and I'm not sure how impactful the Caltrans issue has been on our ability to underground utilities, but certainly that would be one thing we would want to look at. And then the ability to control the widening and the incursion of the roadway into private properties, stream beds, and ecologically sensitive areas. I mean, I think if we could control that a little bit better and keep that within our ability to control, I think it might be a positive thing.
Great, thank you. And George, you are up.
Thank you, Penny. I don't know what the costs are. We talking about probably the negatives being the cost of the insurance for liability is should something happen in the canyon. That may be significant. We need to know what it is. Number two, the cost of maintaining that road and what kind of deal Caltrans will give us for taking over the road. So I think I am in favor of the city annexing Laguna Canyon Road, because if you don't control the roads, you won't control the destiny of the canyon. And you're subject to Caltrans and their whatever their plans might be for the future. So on the positive side, I see control of the destiny of the canyon at stake and the beautification of that roadway. I think somebody mentioned previously bike paths and walkways. Those would be great and a great addition. I'd also like to go a little bit further here because the city has neglected over, I don't know, 20 to 30 years to really do a hydrology mapping of the canyon's waterways. And this is important because some of them intrude onto the Laguna Canyon Road and when they overflow. So what is it? What areas in the future, what does the city want to channelize? What areas in the future does the city want to restore? What are the tributaries of that creek? How do you get any kind of guidelines that are beneficial to residents and to builders and to the Laguna Canyon, I should say the Coastal Commission's LCP? Without that happening, that has to be done. And it's unfair to the residents and the rest of us because we're in a floodplain and all of that affects downtown and the rest of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, George. So next is Bob.
Yeah, this is, I think, an important issue. George, I think, hit on the right question, which is the costs and benefits of it. We actually have a study. The council has already commissioned a study that's being undertaken to look at the costs and benefits of that. We also authorized this year, and we got legislation approved by the legislature for Caltrans to relinquish the road. They have to have that authority. So we moved ahead and got that legislation passed by the legislature. I believe it's on the governor's desk, but that would give us the option, not the requirement, but the option of taking it over. You know, so I think it would be a great benefit as long as we're not taking on an undue liability or exposure or cost. So we need to understand those numbers, but the benefits are crosswalks we could put in ourselves, lights if we want additional lights, The undergrounding would be more, easily facilitated. In terms of the characteristics of the improvements to the road, we're calling the shots. So if we want DG pass, we can get DG pass. We can do the bike paths. So there's a lot of upside to it. We can control the speed limits. I mean, it's amazing how fast people get going, by the time they're out, heading out to El Toro Road. We can control, issues like lighting on the road that would be more amenable or more consistent and compatible with what we see here in Laguna. So, if we can do it in a financially responsible way, and I think maybe we can, through proper insurance. I mean, Dana Point's taken over portions of PCH, Newport's taken over portions of PCH, and they're not going under financially. So there must be a way we can do it prudently, and I think there's big upside.
Great, thank you, Bob. And Steve.
Thank you, Penny. I think Larry and Bob did a really good job of explaining the advantages and disadvantages. We are in the process, as Bob said, of doing the study right now, but I do want to comment that Lisa Bartlett, our supervisor, said that the best decision she ever made when she was a council member in Dana Point was to take Coast Highway as one of their roads rather than Caltrans. So there's really good precedent for this. And I think that what's important is if we were to do it with all the benefits, detriments, or whatever, that we talk about what it's going to be like. I am on record and have voted for this in the past as saying that I want to keep this one lane in each direction. Now, there is a center area that we probably want to retain some flexibility so that for emergency vehicles, potentially for some super transit kind of a thing, where if we could get external parking like we have in the past with Summer Breeze and have the buses be able to come and go better, then we could keep cars from coming into Laguna Beach. So I think that the real question ultimately is going to be, what is it going to look like? I don't want to be expanding it to 2 lanes in each direction. I don't want to be widening the road and going onto private property. I think that maintaining the rustic feel is really important, but gaining the control so that we have flexibility to do more things for our residents is also important.
Thank you, Steve. So, and Ruben, now it's your turn.
Well, everybody hit some really great points. I think what we're looking at is.
Hey, Ruben, it's hard to be last, isn't it?
It is, yes. Okay, so I can just say they did great. Let's move on. The biggest one obviously is money. Do we have the money in, and do we want to spend it there? And what is the benefits? But then if you do look at Corona del Mar and also Dana Point, look what they were able to do with it. But then if you look at their road, they have a much wider road, and their beautification of the center island was phenomenal. It really changed the difference in those 2 towns. I don't know that we want to do that in our instance. So it is the cost of benefits. And I think from being a kid and remembering coming through the canyon, the joy of hitting what I thought was the Rockies or Yellowstone coming into the canyon would be a shame to lose that ruralness. If you get to Healdsburg and see their bike path that goes next to the train tracks, and they put old pieces of farm equipment on the side and then did some native landscaping, and it's a meandering path. That would be the joy for me, to make sure that we maintained the ruralness. We gave it a little spiffiness, but remember, we have PMMC, we have LCAT, and we have Annalise. We need to take care of those places, but we also need to know that they're the hub of the canyon as far as the organizations, and then of course the beautiful neighborhoods. And speaking of the neighborhoods, there, as you go into Canyon Acres and a few of those other areas, there are a couple small developments that are really out of sync. And so we want to make sure that those don't happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. So the third question, and a couple of you have kind of touched on this a little bit, and this is certainly, this is an issue that we CANDO and others have agitated about in front of City Council a lot. So This is the mapping question. The city's major watersheds and drainage courses map and the biological resource values map were drawn in 1981. The Laguna Canyon area was annexed in 1989. So these maps show nothing beyond what was then the city's boundary at Big Bend, just blank white paper with no contours, no street names, no creek. But unfortunately, those maps are still a part of our local coastal plan. And as recently as this year, the city has used the maps to justify planning decisions by claiming the maps demonstrate that Laguna Canyon Creek has no environmental value. So clearly, if you look at the map drawn in 1981 of biological resource values and you try to see if the animal shelter is on it, it isn't, because it wasn't annexed until 8 years later. It's been 31 years since the annexation. What actions would you recommend that the city take? In this case, we're going to begin with George, and then next is Bob and Steve.
Thank you, Penny. I've been at city council meetings where the community development director acknowledged that the city had not done the mapping and the city should do the mapping, but it was never done. And I hold city council responsible for that. Bob and Steve and other city council members haven't really exercised the political will to make this happen. And it's extremely important for the Canyon residents to understand, and for the city itself to know where the Blue Line Creek actually is and how then that guides development on each side of the creek. How can you have a Blue Line Creek, that is not mapped? So that's something the city takes advantage of, because they say, well, we don't know where the blue line, the middle of the creek is. So let's decide it's over here. Let's decide it's over there. And that's just unfair to all parties. It's also unfair. Steve mentioned earlier that Coastal Commission's not our enemy. It isn't. They're there to guide us at the right decisions on how we develop the canyon, how we develop the coast. And obviously we haven't been good partners with them. We need to rebuild that relationship. We need to do the mapping as well for hydrological reasons to understand where on the side of the banks of the canyon is most likely, when there's a 10-inch rainfall, the debris will fall in. We've had containers fall in and cars fall in the past. We don't want that to happen again. Let's do the mapping. Thank you.
Thanks, George. And Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Penny. Yeah, I think the history on this is that the city did do some mapping and submitted to Coastal, proposed, mapping, and Coastal came back with a whole bunch of amendments that they wanted to make many other portions of town with drainage, give them the Blue Line Stream designation. And at the time, I wasn't on the council, but the city decided to withdraw the map because it was, so impactful in terms of what could happen in many parts of town. Now, having said that, I think it's fair criticism to say the city's waited too long. It should have been done. It's been brought up. It's been on the work plan. It got pushed back. It should be a priority. It needs to happen. I think it's fair criticism that George and others bring up that it hasn't happened yet. I think the key is trying to get it to Coastal and say, look, this is a Blue Line Stream. We want to get this protected. Let's talk with you. If you have other issues in other parts of town, let's bifurcate that and talk about it. But this is Laguna Canyon Creek. This is a Blue Line Stream. I mean, Bob Borthwick, we all saw a presentation. Bob did an amazing job of, all the way from El Toro Road in, showing what could be done. And the city put some money to that. We put, I think, $50,000 to a first installment of that. But more needs to be done. We need to look for opportunities to restore the creek and protect the creek and make sure that development, is really clear. There was a big debate on the Longy thing. Is it 25 feet from the center line of the creek or 10 feet from the bank of the creek? I mean, let's not have ambiguities. Let's make it sure it's all spelled out and clear and protects the creek. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Steve?
I want to add on to some of the things that Bob said. Historically, the city has twice tried to update the maps with the Coastal Commission. And George, I respect what you say about the Coastal Commission, what their purpose is, but in reality, they have often been obstructionist to the kinds of things we want to do. In this case, it was that they wanted to add seasonal streams to the maps, which would have had a very detrimental impact on many of the residents in the Canyon area. And so, yes, we need to work better with the Coastal Commission, but it's very difficult sometimes when they're going to do things that adversely impact on you. We do need to update the maps. What I would suggest is that the council form a committee consisting of residents from the Canyon area. We have a lot of people there who have great expertise, who could be very helpful in putting something forward and helping us work with the Coastal Commission so that the maps can be updated. I agree, Penny, the maps simply don't reflect reality.
Thank you, Steve. And I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I don't lose my place here.
It's Ruben's turn.
Ruben, yes, okay. Thank you. Yeah, keep me on track.
Yeah, the constant conversation is that there's 3 parts to Laguna. There's downtown, there's South Laguna, and there's the canyon. But the truth is there's Laguna. And why should we be treating one area any different than another? So huge importance on mapping this out. It's not like this part doesn't matter and another part does. Yes, working with Caltrans, with the Coastal Commission can be difficult, but it's another check and balance. So we need to make sure that that check and balance is worked with and brought forward so that it's something that we can understand. And as Steve says, if we do a workshop where we meet at the Suzy Q or wherever, and we put on a board so that the residents can see that if we do this, these are the things that might happen, as Bob brought out. And if we do this, then this is what's the benefit. So it doesn't work that a couple city council members know about this, but the residents don't. And it would just be, I think we're finding more and more that the more transparent we are, the better everybody sits. And what we do want is a community of people that are happy with the leadership versus frustrated with the leadership. And the way to make people happy with leadership is make them co-leaders. So let's do some more of the workshops. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. And Larry.
Thank you, Penny. I just want to jump onto what some of the other candidates have said. One of the things that we encounter when blue line streams are mapped are setbacks. So they're watercourse setbacks, and those are benefits many times, and they help in accomplishing many things. One thing that is interesting is how much of Laguna Canyon is already built up around and within these watercourses. And it's not just new development, it's old development. I mean, I was reading through the annexation specific plan, and there are references in there to the creeks flowing through backyards and existing conditions. And so this is something that we need to approach. I think we need to inventory and identify the locations of those streams. But there is always going to be a risk of unintended consequences for the neighbors and for the residents of the canyon that may be adversely impacted by somebody finding a watercourse in their backyard, and that keeps them from doing something that they feel they need to do, longtime residents that they've enjoyed for a long time. So I agree, we absolutely need to look at it. I think we have to understand the benefits of and the burdens of the blue line stream mapping, but I think it's definitely something we need to take a look at and let people make a knowledgeable choice as to how they want to proceed on that issue.
Thank you. I noticed that, and I just want to briefly comment, we are getting questions, of course, in the Q&A, including some people who are looking for clarifying information about that. I don't know that, I think that what we may do is ask those by email afterwards. And the reason that I say that is because some of the clarifying questions are not a good example of something that would help to discriminate between candidates. They're a little bit more arcane. And of course, Steve is probably like, oh, sure, now she doesn't like arcane things, but I'd like us to stay focused on on things that kind of, move this forward in terms of discrimination. So yeah. Okay, thank you. We are now at question number 4, and that is, just look at our time. Okay. Actually, I'm going to jump to question number 5 and work my way back depending on how our time goes. So not that you know the question numbers anyway, so don't even worry. This question is, should there be multi-unit and/or affordable housing in Laguna Canyon? If so, please describe where it should be sited. So, Bob, you're going to be first on this question, and then Steve, Ruben, Larry. Okay, so.
Yeah, again, I think that it depends a little bit on where you define the canyon. To me, the most logical place for that is in the M1A zone, where we've got, like a lot of those tilt up 1-story industrial buildings way closer into town. That, some of those are, as I mentioned earlier, some of those are deeper lots. You could do some multifamily development back there. I think it's important that we look for opportunities to do some senior housing and some affordable housing in town. I don't favor at all what I'm seeing out in the canyon now, where somebody's digging into a hillside and, excavating a huge swath to put in, I don't know, it's either 4 or 6 condominiums there. That's not the right way to do it. That's way too far out in the canyon. So it's got to be it's got to be inside, probably, inside, maybe at the lumber yard and in, and it's got to be sensitive to the road. We don't want a wall of development on the road. It's going to have to, whatever multifamily units are there should be pushed back. And if there are some that are going to be, approved maybe out to Big Bend, inside of Big Bend, on those smaller lots, they should be architecture that's compatible with the canyon. I mean, these concrete boxes that go up, with windows and then fluorescent lights sticking through them, that's not at all conducive. So to the extent I'd push it in closer to town, and to the extent you have maybe 2, 3, or 4 unit development further out, really work on the architecture and make sure it's compatible with the canyon. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
I think when we're talking about this issue, we have to start with what's in our control and what's not within our control. And we have to keep in mind that virtually every day, the state is creating new rules and mandates to create higher density in all the zones, particularly in R1, which basically doesn't exist anymore under state law. And so the question is not merely a policy question, it's a legal question as to how much we can do to stop certain things. With the new ADUs, the new affordable housing rules, these kind of multi-unit and affordable housing will occur with or without our wanting them to be there. It becomes not a policy question. To the extent that something is a policy question and we have discretion and control, I want to go back, and I think Bob mentioned this as well. Look, it's about size, it's about look and feel, it's about neighborhood compatibility. And so the question isn't merely about multi-unit or affordable, it's about whether or not this is something that fits into the neighborhood. And I think that the neighborhood itself needs and should have tremendous input into this question. But I think it's also important to do the following. We have traditionally thought in terms that if there's something we don't want to do anywhere else in town, let's put it out in the canyon. Well, from that is not an acceptable doctrine. I don't accept that doctrine. If there are going to have certain kinds of mandates, then they don't necessarily have to occur in the canyon unless the law requires it. I think that the canyon needs to be protected in some ways more than some other areas, not only because it's been a dumping ground in the past, but because it is the first thing the vast majority of people see when they come to town.
Thank you, Steve. And Ruben?
Steve said for me, what was probably the key word, and that is protection. The canyon needs protection. It is our starting point to come to look at the town. We need to take a look at zoning. Does everybody agree with the way the canyon's been cut up, and then takes a look at the zoning? And then when you speak of what kind of development do we want even within those zones, it depends on the individual parcel. When you look at what, I think it was Horst that did a multi-unit project, but you only saw the side of one and it actually went back. Whereas when you look at the Longy one, it was long. So each one of those needs to be looked at separately to see what the vantage point is. We also want to keep in mind that some of those parcels allow for large trees and more vegetation. And when the product or the project itself, the building, is placed closer towards the canyon, it inhibits the ability to put a larger tree in front. So maybe by placement of that particular edifice on the parcel, we can disguise it so that it's still functional but still beautiful. We need to make sure that it's off the road. We need to make sure that when there is a water flow and or a flood, that, well, part of me says, well, it's a waterway. If it gets flooded once or twice a year, so be it. I kind of like that. It's kind of exciting. Maybe not if you live there, but it is a verge of mountains, and then it comes through to the canyon, through the beach. So I think we need to look at each one of those parcels separately and make sure it is environmental as well as neighborhood compatible. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, thanks, Penny. I think your question had to do with multi-unit or affordable housing. And with regard to multi-unit, there just aren't that many places to put multi-unit developments in town for housing. And I'm generally not in favor of trying to take a site and then max out that site with as many units as you can stick on it. First of all, they're not all that attractive, and second of all, honestly, when you look at the entitlement cost, the architectural cost, and the construction cost, they're not really all that affordable. So I'm not sure that we get to where we've got to get by simply putting up massive housing projects. This is a citywide problem. I mean, we've got some RENA numbers that we really need to meet. Our housing deficiency is said to be over 300, I think. I hope I have that number right. So it's an obligation that as a city we share, and that includes the canyon. I was reminded, I think, by Bob Hemsley during our tour that the Thurston HOA has done a pretty good job at and should get credit for their efforts on affordable housing, and so that's a fact. But I think the way that we really need to tackle affordable housing in the city is not by building massive structures, but by allowing people to create junior ADUs or perhaps modest ADUs in order to accommodate people that need housing. So thank you.
Thanks, Larry. So I just want to briefly say that RENA, which was an acronym that Larry used, just for those who are in the audience that didn't recognize that, that's RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Assessment. So, which is a state dictated number that we need to respond to. So, and George.
Thank you, Penny. Let me respond first by the arena numbers. I think those are numbers we're a target for the city to reach. The city doesn't need to build those. They just have to zone for them to be allowed to be built. Let's make that clear. The state is not saying you must build 350 houses or 350 units within a 10-year period of time. I wanted to make that clear. Secondly, we are not going to build affordable housing in this city if it's done. We haven't built it in 30 years. So how do you build affordable housing? You have to have a nonprofit, a housing authority, or some other nonprofit that is able to raise funds privately and through grants, and then you have to partner with the city. So it has to be a public-private partnership. And that's what I would be for when I elected to city council, helping create that entity. Larry said there's not a lot of places in town where you can do that. There probably aren't, but we have to try. We have to go on the journey because we can't get there unless we do. In the canyon, for example, your question, there might be some places in Sun Valley with very deep lots that could accommodate multi-units without being very visible or very intrusive into the neighborhood, for one thing. Secondly, affordable housing for seniors could be built now in the industrial areas. I think that's allowed. So there are some deep lots. Barnhart Automotive has one of them. They go way back. We have to be very careful about what we build there because it's a floodplain and we're going to be reaching down into the ground where it's very, very wet. And so we have to be very careful about what we build. We can do it, but it has to be moderate and it has to fit in compatibly with the canyon. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so and again, some of these topics are a little bit interlinked. So some of you had touched on this a little bit, and of course, some of the council members may be like, "Yeah, we know what Penny's going to ask us about," but some of the questions were submitted by others. So, so this one. Hundreds of residents spent thousands of hours contributing to the Laguna Canyon planning study, which contains, amongst other things, recommendations for updates to the specific plans and the critical definitions of rural and small scale, or at least initial attempts at them. So the city had previously committed to begin implementation in 2018. That has not happened. The city instead has taken up other tasks, and I acknowledge there's a lot of work to do, such as addressing major development projects. So if elected, how would you strike the balance? How do you see the balance between major development projects, which clearly do require attention, and meeting this kind of commitment to residents? So Steve, you are first on this, and then Ruben.
Yeah, I just would like you to help clarify. I did not understand the last part of what you just said. Are you trying to say that you're going to make it, in your question, make a distinction between major developments and non-major developments, and how do you balance which ones to go through in the order, et cetera?
So yeah, so what I meant by that, and it may be that the terms are I'm not using the term properly. The city actually has a list that they call major development projects, right, with that specific title. And generally right now, the Honaker projects are in that. The city manager's doing updates on those and so on, right? So, and the city has been, has put a lot of planning attention to, do we need to hire extra staff? How are we managing this, right? How are we dealing with this influx, right? So that's what I'm calling major development projects, that actual title and category. I did not by that necessarily mean just big stuff. I meant that official category that the city recognizes that they call major development projects. So that occupies some bandwidth. So do other ongoing, multi-threaded, really affecting the residents' planning efforts, like the Laguna Canyon planning study, right? So where's the balance between those legitimate needs, right? And yeah.
Yeah,
so
in some ways, this comes down to a management style. And so, first of all, it's clear we simply don't have the manpower or extra staff that we need to have in order to do everything. And so, one, we need to distinguish. I think your distinction actually is valid between the larger kinds of projects that require extra time, like a montage project, versus the smaller projects. And we're going to have to, I think, specialize and have certain people within the departments be experts of one versus experts on the other. And in addition, and this is something we've done before, we did it during the fire rebuild after the 93 fire. We need to be hiring short-term people, either as employees or as independent contractors. But this ultimately is not a question of desire. It's a question of manpower. And it's a question of making sure we have enough people to do the things that we need to do. During COVID, it's been particularly difficult, but we're going to come out of COVID. And when we do, I think that either the city manager will should come to us with a plan, or if he fails to, then we need to do an agenda bill to help him prioritize making sure that we have the sufficient numbers of people to do this kind of work. There are many people in the county who are retired from doing this kind of stuff, who on a per diem type basis can come back and help us out. I think that's the direction we need to go.
Thank you, Steve. Ruben?
When some of us were young, there was this thing that we used to listen on the radio that was American Bandstand, and they used to say that like top 10 songs or the top 30 songs, whatever, you used to listen to them as you drive. I would put that board up inside City Council and put it somewhere on the outside so that you could see it whether the city buildings were open or not. And that would be a revolving chart of the priorities of our city. And each week, maybe every 2 weeks, maybe at the council, those numbers would change according to how it is. I don't see that as we don't have time for management. I see it as mismanagement. I think our present city council isn't necessarily managing this particular facet of our city. There was a committee in charge of managing the top projects. I think it was 2 years ago with the Honecker projects. And how can it be managed and then they get red tagged twice? Somewhere, someone's not managing those projects and they're red tagged 2-3 times. And so what kind of management is managing that if they're not being managed? We need to make sure that everybody, even in the COVID, post-COVID, disease-free time, that everybody is getting a piece of the city council and that we're making decisions about all the areas. We shouldn't be what I call managing by screaming. So somebody screams and then you go manage. And so that's not the best way to do it. So let's put this top 30 hits, put it in front so that everybody can see it a day before city council, all the time. And then somebody can call and say, I think number 28 should move up to number 4. And then we, as a city, decide what are our biggest tasks and how are we going to handle them. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, thank you, Penny. We have these visioning projects once in a while where we have these planning studies or these great groups of people that get together and they spend a lot of time and they look at issues, they identify problems, and then they try to craft a plan for where we ought to be and where we ought to go. And we saw it with the Vision 2030, then we're almost at 2030. And part of the issue that we have with these things is that the metrics really are not solid and in place for implementation and timing. And so we come up with these great, I mean, we have wonderful people with wonderful ideas and big thoughts and lots of talent. But I think these things need to be prioritized, and then the metrics ought to be set up so that we can tick them off and accomplish them. And then we have some way to measure our progress by, you know, how we do. I think this is the problem whenever we get into in Laguna, whenever we get into these visioning projects. And I would like to see just a little bit more organization in terms of implementation so that maybe we can have some measurable results as to what we're actually accomplishing when we invest the citizens' time in making these plans.
Thank you. And George.
Thank you. There are 5 major development projects that I think you're speaking of, Penny, and that's the Clio Museum project, the Hive, the 40 apartment units in the Canyon, and Hotel Laguna. So you've got 2 of them in the Canyon, very close to you. And I think all 5 of those are major development projects. What do you define as a major development project? Well, those are all under an integrated development agreement, right? And they allow for an overlay zone for each of those projects to bypass the current zoning and general plan if there's a finding by the city council that there's some benefit. We saw that at the Montage, and we negotiated those benefits, and we negotiated a vote on a referendum on those projects. That's exactly what we should do with all of those 5 Harnacker projects, because they are very, very big. One's block long. We've never seen a block long development in Laguna Beach, ever in our history. Should we have one? I don't think so. Or should we be allowed to vote on it? For sure. And that's what the ballot initiative that I helped sponsor is going to do. That will allow a vote to create that balance between residents and development, which isn't there today. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Bob?
Yep, thank you. I think the question was, striking the balance, and it is a prioritization question of, where do you put the resources? The council goes through an extensive planning, strategic planning session every January where we try to set priorities. And I think part of the underlying here is, and we've had some questions here tonight about, well, it seems like the Canyon projects are getting pushed to the back and not really getting worked on. But, and not to be defensive, but just to be factual about it, there were a tremendous amount of staff resources committed to the Laguna Canyon Road Task Force. That was a 2-year effort. There was a lot of task time committed to the wildfire mitigation report, which also is a big benefit of the Canyon. So we try to take on projects that have, broad implications for, many parts of the community. But having said that, and we touched on them tonight, the Laguna Canyon specific plan update was on the books. It got pushed and pushed. And, I think we need to reprioritize that. And we've talked about the creek and the Blue Line stream. So we do have to strike a balance. There has been something of a balance, but it hasn't, not all the Canyon projects have progressed and move ahead. So, and I encourage more Canyon residents to speak up and let us know. That's how things get prioritized.
Thank you. So, okay. So we're making pretty good time. This is good. We'll have a chance to answer a number of audience questions, I think. So thank you all for being fairly pithy there. The city's cultural arts plan identifies multiple ways to support artists that don't involve large, dense projects, such as the 28-unit DIG project on the banks of the creek. In point of fact, Artist Work Live is the 4th on the list of things that artists expressed as a preference. The cultural arts plan identifies things like rental incentives to support the use of existing spaces in the community. So if elected, how would you support artists? And Ruben, you're going to go first, and then Larry.
Wow, good question. It seems like more and more our artists are doing art out of their homes or out of smaller and smaller galleries. In trying to find artists myself for different functions, I end up going to people's homes. I would like there to be more artist community planned areas like Kathy Jones complex, but also too, when you get into that complex, it looks like there would be no artists in that area, because looking at that complex from the street, it looks not very artistic. So I would like our city to support that, so that we actually do have areas that are specifically designed for that. And we now have the galleries that used to be around Bluebird Canyon, and we had the strength of art in that particular area, and it's gone and is now in North Laguna. I would like, again, for the city to make an effort to create artist areas, to promote artist areas within different regions of the city. So maybe there was 2 in South Laguna, 2 in Mid Laguna, 2 in North Laguna, 3 in the canyon because it's larger. So, and how we would do that is incentives, support. I would like to make sure that the artists are taken care of, and revolving renting, something like that, I think could be very interesting. And of course, you would bring all the artists together and we would chat about how we can make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Barry?
The artists have a tremendous economic impact on our community. The arts and the artists do. And I think if you take a look at the Arts and Economic Impact Report, the numbers are really pretty thoughtful and they're pretty staggering. But in terms of the places for artists to work and way for artists to display and way for artists to do their work, and I'm talking about all art forms now, including, fine arts, visual arts, musical arts, architecture, and all of every aspect of it that we enjoy here, ceramics, sculpture. One thing that we have here as a kind of a base plan is the College of Art and Design. I just think it's a great treasure, and I think schools do great things for communities, but I think that school in particular does some wonderful things. I would like to see a little bit more integration, if at all possible, with the creative placement and live work assessment, and see if that could be involved a little bit more creatively with the school and the faculty. I don't know if it's possible or not, but I just think it would be a nice thing to take a look at. I would like to see the display periods and extended. I mean, I hate to see that we're sort of limited to a 3-month period where we really get to enjoy all the work of the great artists, with the exception of the galleries. I'd like to see that expanded, perhaps on an informal basis, to try to support the artists a little bit more. I've got some more ideas, but I'm out of time. Sorry. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, and George.
Thank you. I haven't thought a lot about this because I don't know what the needs of the artists are. Certainly, the first thing I would say is they'd like to have housing at a reasonable cost. So affordable housing covers artists, if we developed it in the canyon, that artists could apply for and live in. The ADUs are another avenue for that as well. And I think you could apply some ADU incentives specifically for the canyon, where there's the ability to create or build studios that would fit into the landscape and not really take away from the rural, rustic feel of the neighborhood. So those are things I think we should do. We even, I think, should do more in terms of perhaps looking at subsidies that could be taken from other taxations. And I'll talk about that on Saturday, because I think that might be a possibility as well. But I think more should be done for artists for sure, and we haven't done much for them. And I try to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Thanks, Penny. I mean, there's, I think we're all very supportive, obviously, of the arts community. We know it's an important part of our history, important part of who we are. There are some ways, I think there are some ways we have helped, but there's some ways we can continue to help. I mean, I think one of the exciting programs that came into effect this year was, thanks really to the Laguna Beach Community Foundation passing money over to our Arts Commission from Wayne Peterson, a former council member. they've now got, artist grants, significant dollar grants, I think up to $10,000 for art projects. So, you're basically hiring the artist, right, to create art. I think if we could look for more ways to utilize that kind of grant program, we get the temporary art for the community, and we get the artists working at the same time. What I hear from artists is even more than housing, because they all live somewhere, is they could benefit from workspace. And we buy as a city, we buy open space. We invest in public improvements, and maybe an opportunity would be to look for a building we could buy that would be workspace and for artists, and low cost workspace. We'd rent out below market rates, because you'd never recoup, at a market rate, you'd never recoup, and you wouldn't achieve your purpose. So I think we could look at something like that. But I think getting both grants to artists to create art for us, and perhaps creating workspaces at a reduced cost would be a couple of good ideas.
Thank you, Bo. And Steve.
Thank you, Penny. I think that in addressing this question, we have to be somewhat pragmatic about it. This is a difficult thing to do in a city like Laguna, where there are high property values. So no matter what we do come up with to try to answer this problem, it's a challenging situation. And I think we have to recognize that our live work program has basically failed. And I think it's going to continue to fail. I think George is correct. The ADUs are going to provide opportunities. I think they're going to provide opportunities throughout the city, not merely in the canyon. I think that the single thing we could do best is through some sort of liberalizing of zoning, so that we could allow people to live and work in the same place without it being called a live work project and fitting certain things, so long as they can meet certain kinds of conditions, like you do with a conditional use permit, such as safety, imposition of safety requirements, hour requirements, noise requirements, noxious odor requirements, all those kind of things that can make an artist's working area obnoxious for the neighborhood. If we can put in controls of those kind of things, then I think that being able to do more studio work where you live will probably help solve the economic problem the best way we can.
Thank you. Okay. So then this is going to be, I think, the last of our preset questions, and then we're going to turn to our audience questions. And again, we've touched a little bit on this, but the city's relationship with the Coastal Commission has been an uneasy one. But residents currently feel they need the commission to protect valuable habitat. As noted earlier, at least a couple of times within the last few years, projects have been appealed to the Coastal Commission because the city had said, or the biology report had said, there's no valuable habitat in Laguna Creek. And the Coastal Commission biologist on appeal said, no, there's regionally significant environmentally sensitive habitat in the creek. And that's an important protection. So how do we move forward with our relationship with the Coastal Commission? That's merely one example. There are plenty of others, but right now they're providing that value. If we would like them to sort of, like leave us alone, then probably we should be meeting those needs at home, right? So that citizens don't have to be appealed to Coastal Commission. So the question is, make comment on the relationship with the Coastal Commission and make some suggestions about how we should move forwards. And Larry, you're starting with this one.
Great, thanks. Thanks for saving this one for the best for last, I guess. You're right. We have had sort of a little bit of a troublesome problem with the Coastal Commission. I've appeared before the Coastal Commission several times, and you have a Coastal Commission staff, and you have coastal commissioners, and sometimes they view the world the same, and sometimes they don't. I think one great example is recently, I think we had staff approval of our parking concept where we wanted to do our parking rates, and we got that got shot down by the commissioners themselves, and I think came as even a surprise to the to the staff. We have been working, believe it or not, with in trying to establish some parameters with the Coastal Commission in making sure that we're on the same page and making sure that our local coastal program is in line with internally consistent and making sure it's in line with the Coastal Act. When Greg Post was with us here and he was our planning director, he was working hard at getting some harmony on those things. And I think we were starting to make some progress with regard to issues such as development limits and bluff edge and things like that. And I think Mark Weiner has continued on and has worked to try to make progress on those things. But, you know, we have a parking issue here. The Coastal Commission is a big part of that. They have a dog in that race. We have one medical facility in town. That's important to everybody, but the Coastal Commission is going to have a say in that. We have underground and utility issues. We have kind of a poor local coastal program when it comes to addressing affordable overnight accommodations. So there's lots of work to do with the Coastal Commission. I have worked with them. I have argued before them. I have experience with them. They're not impossible to deal with.
Thank you, Larry. George?
Well, all I can say is I was at a hearing, it was a visual hearing, in Salinas, where Jack Ainsworth said that Laguna was among the worst offenders in violating Coastal Commission regulations. I think Malibu may have come in second. So what does that tell you? It tells you that we have a very, very long way to go in mending our relationship with the Coastal Commission. Our LCPs have been a mess, and that has drawn fire from people like the Fudges, who last year had 12 appeals on coastal projects, 11 of which were upheld. We have had extraordinary violations, and one is 11 Lagunitas, where the owners thumbed their nose, maybe their middle finger, at the Coastal Commission and said, we don't want to cooperate, just go after us. The entire project was approved over the counter, and it was a major redevelopment. Although Nancy Sierra may differ, she stayed at the architect's condo in Mexico, so there was some question about whether or not there was a conflict of interest. Certainly there was. Now the city itself is citing on behalf of the resident, after the Coastal Commission ruled that they were in violation and had to pay a $1 million fine. It's been appealed to the courts. And Laguna Beach is spending money supporting the resident viewpoint, who is clearly in the wrong. So these are the kind of violations that happen again and again and again and again. And we have to put a stop to it. We've got to cooperate with the Coastal Commission. We have to cooperate with the state and the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, I think the Coastal Commission is obviously an important part of our world, and maybe we interface with them virtually on everything, as it was noted, from parking rate increases to developments. And I think it's an easy narrative to say, you know, you've got a terrible relationship with the Coastal Commission. I actually think we've made a number of strides in improving that relationship. Short-term lodging ordinance, the Coastal Commission, if you listened to that hearing last month, they were most complimentary of the city in our approach to the short-term lodging ordinance. And they gave us a 60-day continuance because they wanted to ask us to do a few more modifications, but they were expressing their praise. The fuel modification zones that we've worked through extensively with them. Again, big props, big compliments for environmentally sensitive fuel modification techniques. So we have, and Mark Weiner, our new community development director, you know, has made a lot of effort to work with Coastal and improve relationships with staff. And we do get a lot of good staff support and for our recommendations, some of our actions. A lot of the problems have arisen from imprecision in our codes and major remodel definition, bluff top, lack of definition. We're in the process of fixing those. And once we fix the rules, it's kind of like Laguna Canyon Creek and setbacks, right? Once you fix the rules and get away from ambiguity, it's all going to run a lot better. So we need to do better on that. We're in the process of doing that. We need what we need to do. We need to do what has to be done there. And I think we will get it done, and it'll be a brighter future with us in the Coastal Commission.
Thank you, Bob. Steve?
Yeah, I agree with what Bob was just saying. And I think that it's critical to understand that there have been two major issues that the city has had with the Coastal Commission, which have truly soured our relationship with them. And these issues go back to well before Bob and I got on the council, and has to do with the definition of a major remodel and the definition of a bluff top. Now, these two definitions, although I actually think we are right and Coastal Commission is wrong, and the only way you know what the law is if you go to court. I don't feel it's worth going to court. There aren't enough situations in town where these two definitions are affecting that many homeowners. I think it's time for us to give up on these issues, concede the issues to Coastal Commission, although there are some points that, because of the way Newport Beach does things, that may be incorporated that will modify Coastal Commission's position, but it's time for us to be on the same side of the table of the Coastal Commission. And part of why that doesn't happen is that traditionally council members are not involved in the relationship. It's traditionally staff. And the reason for that is that staff is there forever in theory, whereas council members come and go. But I think sometimes that council members have certain skills that would be helpful in creating a better relationship. And I think that the relationship with Coastal Commission is extremely important, not just because of these kinds of land use issues we talked about, but if we're going to be solving the parking problems throughout town, we're never going to get there without Coastal Commission being on our side. And I think they will be on our side because the Coastal Act is very clear that they must balance the rights of tourists versus the compatibility of tourists in neighborhoods. And so I think that when we've been able to show them the impact that tourists are having, they've worked with us. And I think council members sometimes are better at expressing that than staff. And I would be recommending going forward that council members be included in the process in a way they haven't been before.
Thank you, Steve. I'm hearing some background noise, so if you're not speaking, maybe mute. And Ruben.
Thank you. I think our town is sitting on some really great heroes, sitting on the laurels of some really great heroes that were environmentalists that did some really great things. I think we do have a couple wonderful ones. Penny, you are one, and Hallie is another. There's still a couple, and Bob, that are still fighting for the environment. I think our current city council, as a bigger broad stroke statement, is more into environmental when it comes to fire, but not necessarily when it comes to the environment as a whole. Bob, I want to thank you for being someone that was holding up undergrounding in the canyon. And I personally couldn't believe when we would go to city council and people said it wasn't necessary. It is a very important issue. And I get it. If we don't have coastal there, I don't know that there's someone in our current city council or in the city staff that would look after the environment. I mean, we have to push just to get an arborist. And I hear that he's back on the list. But why isn't there a second city arborist, his junior and tertiary? I don't feel that we're really being in charge of this unbelievable natural resource. And so I thank goodness we have the coastal bluff, like Steve just spoke about. And do you know that the Hotel Laguna has done nothing to go to the Coastal Commission, and they were doing construction on the bluff edge. And when I brought that up, Mark says, oh yeah, we may have to go do something about that. So we're not, as a town, looking after it ourselves. Again, we're waiting until somebody screams, and then we'll take a look at what's happening. So we need to be good people and make sure we're looking after the coastal bluff and the erosion and hydro seeding and doing what we can to ensure that our town is taken care of. Gotcha.
Thank you. Okay, so we are, thank you for all of that, council candidates. We have had quite a bit of conversation dropped into the Q&A, and we're not going to have time to address all of it in this setting. I am going to screen through them and hopefully have council candidates make some responses by email. And I may consolidate to some themes, because there are, I think, rather than ask all the individual questions. So I'm just going to take a moment here. Our co-host has been carefully sending me stuff. Let's see. Yeah, and I have to say, for those of you who submitted questions, there's some really good questions. Those of you who submitted, there are a number of people who asked questions of a particular candidate. And because I want to keep this as a, who did we just lose? That's not good. We just lost George. Hopefully he'll come back. Hopefully George will log back in. I don't want to ask questions of a particular candidate, right? I want this, it's difficult to make it be fair and even-handed. And if you ask a targeted question of one candidate, then I have to find some way to ask an equally targeted question of another. So these are great questions, and I'm happy to get them to the candidates. So if you're, an audience member who's like, darn, my question was good, accurate, and biting, and she didn't ask it, that's why, right? I'm looking for things that I can ask of everybody. Let me just, so I'm just scrolling a little bit here, and I apologize for making you wait. Our fabulous co-host has done a lot of the work for me on screening them, but I still have to do a little bit of
Must be gamers
screening.
out there.
So yeah, and you would think, couldn't I have done that during? Yeah, my brain would not allow me to look at the time, count the questions, think about the order of the candidates, and read this. I thought it was gonna, but no. So let's see. Yeah, great question. But again, a question specifically for one candidate, but I may ask a version of that. Yeah. Okay, so Dan Mariner does have a general question, and so what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to give Dan, I'm going to have do an allow to talk, okay? And so now, Dan, if you want to unmute and ask your question. So council candidates, you are going to have 1 minute to respond to this question. And we are going to go through in the same alphabetical order. So that means, George, you'll be first, and we're going to have 1 minute. So Dan, are you ready to ask?
Yep. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. My question is for everyone. Thanks for being here. What is your position on Mo Honaker's many development projects in Laguna, including but not limited to the housing units he proposed at the intersection of Laguna Canyon Road and Canyon Acres Drive, which is a few hundred feet from where I live?
Okay.
Thank you, Daniel. I've made my position pretty clear earlier, but here it is in summary form. I think all of those 5 projects are under an integrated development agreement, and which will allow the city council to create overlay zones for each one, bypassing the normal zoning and general plan, if there's a finding that there's a public benefit for each of those projects. I don't think that's the right way to go. I think that voters need to make that decision on whether these large projects should be approved. Maybe they will be, but we should have a say. And that's why I've sponsored the ballot initiative that has just been approved by the city attorney, and we'll be collecting signatures in a couple of weeks. So watch for that. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Okay, sorry. Okay. Bob.
Yeah, there's a wide range of projects that some of which I'm not even sure are still being pursued. I guess we'll find out. I think everybody's going to support, right, a nice historic renovation of the Hotel Laguna. Everybody wants that. It needs to come back. It's the heartblood of our historic downtown there. Some of the other projects really never made it off the ground anywhere. Yeah, he had a proposal over at Clio that I think, if it had been properly sized, would have been a very nice update of that hotel we have there currently. I think some units at the Canyon Acres might have worked, not 30 units, maybe it's a smaller project. The one up on North Coast Highway, that's a long way from being ready for prime time.
Thank you. Sorry, and Steve.
Thank you. Specifically with regard to the site at Laguna Canyon Road and Canyon Acres, that's a very dangerous site. Even when it was merely a parking lot, it was a very dangerous site. So I'm not really in favor of seeing that site developed. And I also want to add, as far as I know, there are no projects coming from the Laguna company right now. I haven't seen anything specific. I don't agree with George about voters voting on major projects. We have a representative form of government. And I think that things work best by doing that. If there's a particular project that is overwhelmingly unacceptable to the public, that's when you can do an initiative. And that's what happened during Montage. That was not done as a matter of right. That was done as a matter of demand.
Thank you. And Ruben.
I agree with, I guess it was Bob, maybe Steve, that said, no, there shouldn't be a multi 30 unit project there in the canyon. I would be interested to hear, to rehear probably what the canyon wants for the canyon. And I'm talking that whole stretch where there's homes. Would they like to see more crosswalks and more signals? Would they like to not see more Would you want to slow it down, speed it up? As far as Honaker, almost all of the projects go into the contemporary realm. And that's not what would be fitting for the, and I think they use the same architect for all their projects. So it would need to be from a different architect, and it needs to be fitting with the canyon. And for Steve to say that there's a representative for the city from him, it's not true, because it's not coming through. So we need to closely monitor what's going on with that organization. Thank you.
Thank you. And Larry.
Yeah, I want to echo what Bob said with regard to the Hotel Laguna. That project needs to get going. It needs to get finished, but it needs to be done right, and it needs to be done thoughtfully. There are, I think, some strategies that could be used to get the guest rooms open, get the restaurants open, get the retail spaces open, and get that going. I don't think we necessarily have to do it all at once and then come back and visit what you want to do on the bluffs, if anything. With regard to the Clio Street project, I think there's something nice that could be done there, but it has to meet proper density standards. It has to meet design review standards. It has to meet view equity. It has to meet privacy. It has to be properly parked. With regard to the canyon, which I think people are interested in, I'm not sure that the best solution is to dump a high density residential project in that location. I'm not sure right now what works, but I think it's got to be carefully studied for access and for density.
Thank you. You're such well-behaved candidates. You're barely talking over the time at all. Maybe I need to only give you, I only gave you a minute on those ones. So, okay. Let me just take a quick look, because again, I apologize that I'm sort of double screening here to pick out let me scroll down and find John Albritton, who has a question. Here we go. So apparently I can't do that on, okay. So John Albritton has a question, and John, I'm going to allow you to talk. You can unmute and ask your question.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, hi everybody. Thanks for doing this for our canyon. My question that I reworded so it's not addressed to a specific candidate is, are you in favor of upzoning in the canyon to accommodate growth, or do you accept the present zoning as what's best for the canyon?
Okay, thank you. So, and on this question, we're going to be starting with Bob. And again, you have 1 minute.
Sure. Thank you, John. Again, it depends what you define as the canyon. I would not be in favor of upzoning anything, beyond Big Bend. I think that's, but I'd like to understand, and I think we do need to look at the specific plan and understand the zoning. It may actually need to be modified in a way that gets us more of what we want out there. I mean, clearly there's a big project going through out there. So I don't know if that's upzoning, but out in that part, it may be actually, changing the zoning to limit development. Now, if you're all the way in, as I was saying, in the industrial zone, or what I call the industrial zone, if there needs to be some modifications in there to allow some housing, I think that's a good place for some multifamily housing back from the road. So I guess I'd answer it depends on a little bit which part of the canyon you're talking about.
Okay, thank you. And Steve.
Thank you, Penny. John, I think that was an excellent question, because I think it's a very visionary kind of a question. Going back to what I said during my opening remarks, I think that we have a vision of what we want to see. Very, very rural at the El Toro entrance to the canyon, gradation down to what it is down by the Sawdust Festival. I don't want to see any intensification. By upzoning, you mean greater density or greater height or greater mass and scale. I would not agree to any of that. There are specific details that, as Bob was mentioning, that may need to be looked at to accommodate certain things that are going on out there. But I think that it's clear what we want to do is retain as much of nature and wildlife as we can in that area. So I would, generally speaking, be opposed to upzoning.
Thank you. Ruben?
Thanks, John. And I agree with both Bob and Steve. Whatever the zoning is, we need to make sure it stays within what is there now. I think the horse project went in and most people didn't even see it happen, and it's far back enough that it's not an issue. So if more projects went in like that, I think that would be okay in its area. In the residential areas, I'd like to see just the landscape in front and the houses in the back. So what we don't want to do is draw attention unnecessarily by a big fabulous something. It needs to be in line with what exists. Now, some of those properties need to be fixed up, but yes, in line with what is existing zoning. Thanks.
Thank you. And Larry?
Yeah, and I don't have disagreement with what folks have said tonight. I think that the zoning needs to be, to the extent it is reviewed or revised, it needs to be harmonious with itself, and it needs to keep in mind the goals that that we want to respect for the canyon. So we need to respect that. We can't lose the rural feel of the canyon. We can't lose the low density feel of the canyon. We can't lose the rustic feel of the canyon. So we need to keep track of those policies, and we need to make sure that those are intelligently done so that they stay in line with what we want to preserve out there, which is rural character and encouraging a small rural scale of development while meeting the needs of the community and the neighborhoods.
Thank you. And George?
Well, I've always said that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And the Longy project was approved by Kelly Boyd, I believe Steve Dictorow, and one other city councilman, Bob, I believe voted against it, as did Tony. So if you talk about trying to run from your record, that's not going to happen. My wife reminds me of that all the time. I can't run from my own record. So as far as the canyon being keeping the canyon rural. I would say there's some development that can take place, as Bob described it, as you go in. But clearly, we crossed the line with the Longy project, and that's the reason, part of the reason, the provision in the ballot initiative protects the canyon from overdevelopment, gives residents a voice. And I might add that Costa Mesa, Dana Point, and Newport Beach all enacted that kind of ballot initiative, and it was passed by the electorate. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we have, let's do just, so I'll try to pull out just one more question, and then that's going to be our last of the audience questions, because I hope to have us finish about on time. And again, my apologies that I'm keeping you waiting for a moment, because I'm screening, so.
Just trying to pick out the hardest one, Penny, is that it?
That is exactly right. I'm trying to pick out the ones that are devastating. No, as I said to you guys, there are a number of good questions, but some of them touch on things that we've already talked about, if not exactly what the questioner asked, fairly close. And also, some of them are specific to council members. So yeah, not that I wouldn't choose the hardest one, but that would be such a multi-level sword that I'm not sure I can do it.
While you're looking, can we each take 10 seconds and say something that we'd like to while you're searching?
We have 2 minutes.
So you actually are going to have your 1 minute to wrap up, and you will have a full 60 seconds to say what you would like to. So I think I'm going to try to stick with that. So again, one sec here. I think what we're going to do here is, yeah, so I had a question submitted, and I think the neighbor who submitted it was not able to, had to leave. So, so I'm going to read you his question. Okay. I really had hoped to have sort of the additional engagement, but I'm going to read you his question. Okay. So, and we'll make that be our third question. And in this question, Steve, you will be answering first. And again, we will have 1 minute. So, and again, for all of those attendees, I really appreciate the time, the thought, the care, and the passion you put into your questions. We are going to preserve them, and I'm going to try to get answers for them, even if I'm not having you step up to the mic live now. So this is a question from Jay Grant, 47-year resident of Canyon Acres. And he writes, how do you balance open space and protect both private property and Laguna's local habitat? County maps have now included the trail at the end of our street, at the end of Canyon Acres. Out-of-towners have showed up in droves. Suddenly there's gang graffiti on caves, speeding bikers, litter, 2 cars broken into, etc., all on what used to be a quiet residential area. So what does that balance look like? How do we do that? Steve, you are up.
This is a great question from Jay, because it's really something that affects citywide. You're not the only ones who have this kind of an issue, and it's going to take a 2-pronged response, which is not going to be easy, but needs to be done. We have to be able to work with the Coastal Commission to effectively create parking outside of neighborhoods and keep outside tourists, etc., and hikers, etc., so they can't park in our neighborhoods. We also need to have more and better enforcement. That may require more personnel, because our police can't be everywhere at all times. We may need some sort of intermediary kind of groups that can help us with this. But there are certain rights that tourists may have. What they don't have the right to do is trample on our neighborhoods and put our neighborhoods at risk because of their activities, whether it be fire kind of activities, gang activities, or whatever. But it needs to be at least that 2-prong approach.
Thank you. Okay, and Ruben.
I agree. Great question. When the bike trails started to get really overrun, I said, "Oh, are we headed to the path of getting permits to use bike trails like you get a permit to go use Yosemite?" It's something we need to think about. signage that says this is not a public space might help. Signage that says permit parking only might help as well. We do have to brainstorm to figure these things out. It's not going to be something, again, it's something that probably is going to have to come from the Canyon people with the request to have a city meeting so that your concerns are echoed in the rules legislation that comes down to the city so that it is imposed in a proper way. And you Canyon people know best about what you need there. Thank you.
Thank you. And Larry.
Yeah, the open space in Laguna has really become an adventure, hasn't it? I mean, I remember the times we live up at top of the world, and so we like to walk along that West Ridge Trail, and it's very, very popular, and but it's popular with hikers and it's popular with cyclists, and it's popular with large groups of hikers and large groups of cyclists. And it's becoming, I mean, to me, we've raised some interesting issues about trail access and parking and impacts like that. But to me, it's just becoming a life safety issue on some of those trails. And, I think if it's possible, and some of those trails are run by the county, but I think if it's possible, it may be smart to see if we can explore the possibility of some wilderness passes to raise money to maintain those trails, maintain erosion, maintain traffic, and perhaps keep them accessible to everybody while having a fund to be able to maintain them. They're beautiful. If you don't go out there, take advantage of going out there. It's a remarkable area, but it is getting to be risky. Thanks.
Thank you. George?
Well, I'm for preserving the open space. I hike there regularly. And, in the past, I've actually seen a very rare plant there that probably should be our city plant. Our current city plant is the geranium. Okay. And we have an extraordinary plant. It only grows in 6 locations in Laguna Beach. And all of them are in Laguna Beach. And there's 2 locations in the canyon. It's called the Live Forever Dudleya, a subspecies of the main plants of the Dudleya species, which are a number of them. So the canyon is very special. The adventure, I think people should have fun. I think cyclists should be mindful of the damage they do. I'm opposed to these electric bikes, which give more access than is necessary. I agree with Larry. If we could do a wilderness passes to raise some money to do it for maintenance, that would be great. But it's a very difficult problem of enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bob.
Yeah, I think Jay's question goes really back, and I think he was specifically talking about Canyon Acres. I think we need to do a couple things. One, I think we need to work with OC Parks, and maybe there are some access points like that one in a constrained neighborhood where maybe that one's not open on weekends, right? Maybe that's just shut, and then we get some signage up at the top, and or maybe some of those get rotated out of circulation periodically to restore themselves. But I think what we've realized, and Steve, I think, has articulated this pretty well with COVID, is we've been swamped because people have discovered the open space and discovered the beach in ways they haven't ever before. And we've got to be proactive in managing it. And I think coordinating with OC Parks, is going to be a big part of it. I don't know if they'd be open to a permit concept or not, but maybe closing some of those trails to weekend access would be one way to protect the neighborhoods in particular. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And again, lots of good questions. So we will try to pull out some of those. So now we are going to do the candidate final statements, and each of you has 1 minute, and we are going to begin with Ruben.
Oh, all righty then. One of the things that I want to make sure happens is that there's an equitable enforcement of regulation. Right now, I feel it's a pick and choose, and it's usually the small guy that gets picked and the big guy is not. So we've got to make sure that this is an equitable enforcement of laws that the city has. I'd like to see the city put forth a program with the owners of buildings on Coast Highway and maybe the Canyon, Glenary, where there is a rental unit or a leased unit that might be, they don't have a current renter in there. And maybe the city works with LCAD and or LOCA to put in a weekly artist in those. Why didn't Laguna Hotel have all those buildings open with an artist in them? I'm going to take 30 more seconds because you said we should do this. And so what I want is that we do.
I would prefer if you did not, because then the others will as well. So.
Let's live up to our life as a city of artists and get some of those buildings that are empty with some weekly artists inside of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Larry?
Yeah, thanks, Penny, and thanks for the opportunity. I think we all agree that we really want to retain and more accurately enhance the charm of Laguna and the charm of the canyon. And I think we all agree that we all want to maintain our high quality of life while minimizing the impacts that tourism has on our residential communities and our neighborhoods. I think we all agree that the town is always going to experience traffic because of its beauty and its beaches and its trail access, the beauty of the Canyon Road, and we all agree that the large-scale development is impactful. I think we also all agree that the city needs to prioritize work that maintains the public infrastructure, the safety, and the fire safety and the safety of the residents. So thanks, Penny. I think we understand that certain retail is struggling, but I know that all of the residents want to have a government that is transparent and effective and sensitive and responds to its needs. So with that, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Clearly, candidates need more than a minute for closing statements, but telling me that in email ahead of time would have helped, because we're not cracking now. We're just going to stick with our rules. Okay, so George?
Okay, thank you, Penny, for the tour on Saturday and for arranging this. I know it was a lot of work. I think you can't separate the environment of the canyon with its buildings and people. So that's the first thing I would say. And that preservation and that protection has to be for both. So not mapping the Blue Line Creek and understanding the hydrology of the canyon is something that is very much has to be done in the future. And that will help guide development. Secondly, residents in the canyon need to be involved intimately with any changes in the canyon, and they weren't certainly with the Longy project. I haven't spoken to a single person in the canyon who liked it. Okay, so what I will do is make sure residents are involved as your city council person. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Thanks, Penny, and thanks for the forum tonight, for everyone's attendance. Yeah, I think everyone here tonight has expressed the canyon's a special place. It needs love. It needs care. It needs thoughtful rules and regulations and development. I want to aggressively work to improve the canyon. I think it can be improved. I think we can do better creek restoration. We can aggressively pursue outside grant funding for that. I think we can work on getting some more undergrounding and get some pedestrian paths and bike paths in there. I'd love to see that. It's such a beautiful stretch. When you look at the Big Bend where there aren't any poles and there aren't any wires up there, and you see that beautiful wall in the canyon, I mean, that's what it could be. That's what it could be if we got them down there lining the park, for crying out loud. So I want to work hard to continue to make improvements and look forward to collaborating with all the canyon residents and neighborhoods.
Thank you. And Steve?
Once again, thank you, Penny and CANDO, for putting this on. So what have we learned tonight? As a general statement, philosophically, about the canyon, almost all the candidates agree. There are some specific differences, but for the most part, we're all in agreement. And when that happens, how do you make a decision? I think you make it based on who has been effective and who has the experience to be effective. I have an unparalleled record of getting things done in town. Just by way of example, I helped initiate and I led the charge to initiate litigation to create a wildlife corridor or preserve it through Irvine, even outside our city limits, because it required biodiversity. It was my agenda bill that prohibited the city from using rodenticides. I took the lead in saving the bus system. I took the lead in saving the digester. I've taken the lead in saving the community garden. And the list, I have a long list. It goes on and on, all done within the last 2 years. This is the kind of leadership I think the town needs. And I feel my record shows that I'm somebody that should stay on the council.
Thank you. Well, so I want to thank everybody for both the residents attending and the council candidates for your thoughtful and sometimes passionate participation over there in the questions as well as over here in the answers. So as we've all said, development pressure on the canyon is increasing and is only going to continue to increase. And with climate change, the risk of fire, flood, and mudslide is increasing too. So as we face this future, we need intelligent, thoughtful council people who listen to residents, who share our values, who are persistent in working on our behalf. So I hope that tonight's forum helps the Canyon residents decide which 2 candidates should fill that role. I thank you very much for your efforts tonight, but your community service up to this point and ongoing candidates. So when the video of the forum is available, I will post it on the CANDO website. I apologize that I did not get the candidate statements at the beginning. I think we started at the questions, so I apologize for that. But okay, so and with that, I will bring our forum to a close. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.